Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Julia Feder, and I have the privilege of serving as the acting director of the Center for the Study of Spirituality and associate professor of religious studies and theology here at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. I am delighted to welcome you to this webinar. Before introducing our guests, I would like to take a moment to say a word about the center. Founded in 1984 by Dr. Keith Egan, with support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross and the college, the Center for the Study of Spirituality offers programs that promote the engagement between faith and reason and the connection between mind, body, and spirit. As an academic center, it is a hub for scholarly and public engagement, which draws on intellectual resources in the Catholic and broader Christian tradition, as well as how individuals practice faith in their daily lives to develop critical conversations around contemporary religious issues, especially as they relate to women's experiences in society, the academy, and the church. The format for our program this afternoon is threefold. First, author Shannon Evans will offer a brief presentation about her newest book, and then she and I will engage in a conversation about her writing, and then we will leave some space open for questions and comments from our audience. Please feel free to send in your questions at any time during the webinar by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, a tip is to press the More button, and then you might be able to see that. And so now it's my privilege to introduce our guest today. Shannon K. Evans is an editor at the National Catholic Reporter, a facilitator of spiritual retreats nationwide, and the author of The Mystics Would Like a Word, which we'll talk about today, as well as Feminist Prayers for My Daughter and Rewilding Motherhood. She makes her home on the prairies of central Iowa, where she's raising 5 children and an ever-evolving inventory of pets. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thanks, Julia.
And so you can begin now.
Okay. I was like, do I have to explain the ever-evolving inventory of pets, or can we move on? Thank you all for having me. It's delightful to be here. I've heard such wonderful things about St. Mary, so I was really honored to get to spend some time with you tonight. I was joking with Julia that I gave away all the copies that I had of this book, so I feel like I should be holding it up for you, and I am not because I don't have it, but thank you, Julia. That's very kind. So this book, The Mystics Would Like a Word, came about really organically. I started, I think a lot of us remember the hellhole that was 2018. The church was not doing well in this time. There was, a lot of abuse and, headlines, and the Pennsylvania report had come out, and it was just a tough time. Meanwhile, I was having my own personal reckoning with patriarchy in the church and just asking a lot of questions of like, is this the tradition that I belong in? How do I reconcile all of this injustice? How do I stay here? And I kind of stumbled upon Julian of Norwich, and I started reading her book, The Showings. And almost immediately it felt like this is the voice that I've been looking for. Like, if Catholicism can be like this, then yes, this is me. This is what I want. It's just, I didn't know enough to know where to find it. And I felt pretty disillusioned by the lack of female voices in the Catholic Church today, not for lack of merit, but lack of space given. And so that started off, I kind of set myself on this project of like studying the mystics. And I kind of went through, Julian of Norwich. And then I believe the next one I did was Teresa of Avila. And then after Teresa of Avila, I was like, okay, I think this might be a book idea. So it was many years in the making. And it was really just birthed out of a personal exploration and a personal need for female voices. And honestly, I'm going to rewind and tell you, I won't leave you in suspense. I will tell you what other women we cover in this book. But I have to explain first my criteria for who I chose, because there are probably some of you on this call right now who are mystics, more than I ever will be. And so, like, how do you decide who to include in a book where you're going to write about 6 women? So kind of the criteria I decided to land on were people who were women who were well-known, kind of widely accepted as mystics. It's not like a one-off here, it's kind of, and I was rooting it in the Catholic Church. Not only because that's my tradition, but also because so much of historical Christianity is rooted in Catholicism. And I felt like if we're going to go through this, then like, let's stick to this particular funnel and not, there's mystics of many traditions that would have been wonderful to study, but I was like, let's stick to this. And then the real kicker was that I decided I needed them to have written at least one book themselves. And so, because history is what it is, that unfortunately disqualified almost all women of color throughout history. So we're looking at European women who had the privilege of getting an education and knowing how to read or write. So that was a really tough blow, and I'm still kind of sad about that. But I felt like it was really important to read not what people said about them or what people speculated about them, but it was really important for my journey and for the journey that I wanted this book to take readers on, to be able to read in the women's own words. And like, even when you finish my book, to like seek out and read, showing some Julian of Norwich or the Book of Marjorie Kemp or whatever. So that was kind of how I decided, and it was really tough. And I still get emails from people who are like, why didn't you include this person or this person? And I'm like, well, they didn't write a book. That's basically the answer. But the ones that I ended up choosing were Teresa of Avila, Julian of Norwich, Marjorie Kemp, Hildegard of Bingen, Therese of Lisieux, and Catherine of Siena. And so those were the 6 that made the cut. And I feel like when I look wide scope of what I wanted to do with this book, I am well acquainted with the fact that there are many Catholic books about saints and mystics, and I really wanted to bring something modern and fresh to the table. I think one thing that can feel frustrating to me is that so often these women are kind of kept in a glass case, and we're not going to try to understand them or implement them today. We're going to try to somehow make ourselves like them, like we can just be a 1600s woman in England or whatnot. And so my frustration was that in this sort of keeping them in this glass case and not really treating them as real whole people, they ended up kind of getting co-opted as sort of these like trad wives to aspire to. And I felt like they were kind of co-opted by this certain religious agenda that wanted women to be a certain way. And obviously there are exceptions to this as far as books and writings, but that was kind of the overwhelming content that I was seeing, that I was surrounded with. And so my mission with it really became what kind of like present day issues can I can I pull into this and hold them up to the writings of these women and see what these women sort of say about these issues. So things like mental health, things like ecological care, things like the mother wound. That was that's one of my favorite chapters because I wasn't expecting it. I was the divine feminine, it's such a big topic. Can we not, being able to trust ourselves and not solely offer up our trust in our theology and our everything to authority figures. Where are the lines? Where are the boundaries? And fear and death and all of these things that I was wrestling with and still am. And then I was seeing, other women in the same boat. So that became sort of my goal. And along the way, there were some chapters and themes that I had planned for specific women, because I was at that point very well versed on Julian of Norwich. I knew that I wanted one of her chapters to be on the divine feminine, because I feel like screaming into a void, she has been calling God mother for hundreds of years, and we just pretend like that doesn't exist, So that was one that in my head, I went to it like, this is a chapter I'm going to write on her. For example, an entirely different experience was Therese of Lisieux. I knew that I wanted to write one chapter about her as the anti-influencer, as far as living a life that is small and not showy and not needing to make an impact, in the age of Instagram and social media, and how do we live in the very little way that she prescribed. So that was kind of an easy one. And I was also, I had read Story of a Soul years ago, and I knew her pretty well. She was a tough one for me because she's so sweet. But as I was rereading, I think, for the third time, rereading her work, and that the theme of the mother wound just struck me for the first time, of her losing her mother as a child and her kind of grappling with the trauma of that. And we see it, we see so much of how she relates to God. She doesn't use the word mother, but the parent archetype, God really becomes mother for her, and she wants to be small. She needs to be a child. And it just became really fascinating to have this kind of piece of her puzzle unlocked. And not that I have her all figured out or anything, but it became a really interesting chapter that I wasn't expecting, that I hadn't planned. And it led me to, researching this idea of the mother wound, and what does this look like, and how is it kind of consistent among a lot of women, and as we grapple with it as we age. And so that became a surprise. That was really interesting to me. So I think, sorry, big, little picture coming back to big picture. I think the most exciting part of this for me is that I feel like this book is a resource for women who are trying to, honestly, trying to figure out if they can or want to stay Christian, stay Catholic, perhaps, kind of feeling like, do my belief systems belong here? Is this spiritually nourishing for me, this religious tradition, all of these things. And so I am not interested in trying to keep people Catholic or convert people or whatever, but I do want to offer up the treasures that I have found in these women, and be whatever you decide for your own personal life, at least you should read what these women have said, and And you should, you can, not should, I hate the word should, you can take that treasure and implement it into your own life with these modern issues in a lot of different ways. And because I'm a kooky Catholic, I'm like, you can also ask them for help. If one person in particular sticks out to you, you know, they can be a saint that you pray to, that you ask for intercession from, and that kind of thing. So, but like, I'm me. I like being funny. I like being a little bit snarky. I cuss a little bit, you know. So it's just like I wanted the book to feel accessible. That you're, you know, you're kind of reading something that doesn't feel like a lot of labor, because women are constantly doing a lot of labor. And I'm like, I don't want this book to be a heavy lift. I want you to be able to learn about these historical women without feeling like you're putting on your glasses and like sighing and having to do a lot of cerebral work to get through this book. You know, I wanted it to feel fun and enjoyable. But yeah, I think I think a lot of what we need as women are those, you know, mothers, the grandmothers, the sisters, you know, and if certainly in our flesh and blood real lives, but there's so much value, and I think there's such a longing to have that spiritually as well with the women who have come before us. So that is that's my crazy brief download of this book. So thank you, Julia, for the chance to share it.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. And because I've had the pleasure of reading the book, that does really represent the breadth of the things that you cover. And it's funny that you ended in the way that you did, because one of the things that I delighted in doing as I was reading your book is I started making a list of the different ways that you refer to these women. So I wrote in my list that sometimes you talk about them as friends. I have ancestors, big sisters, mothers. Interestingly, you talked about them as models of holy lives. That's not surprising, but you also, especially in the instance of Catherine of Siena, talked about them as models of failure, or ways to not live. So I think that was really interesting. So I wonder if you want to kind of add to that, you know, zooming out before we get into talking about these women individually. How do you want to say anything more about how we should think about these women as a whole, or why we should think about them at all? Like what category we should think about them under?
Yes. Before I get stoned for calling Catherine of Siena a failure, I better explain myself. Yeah, I think what was really refreshing to me was that because I was able to devote so much time with these women and their very own words, and not so much talking about them, I really did feel like I was able to see their full humanity after a while, and kind of see past this veneer of, you know, the shiny saint and the stained glass, and really see, oh, like, yeah, this was a weakness for them. Like, this is a little, I mean, specifically like with the case of Catherine of Siena, of like, oh, she didn't really know when to stop. She didn't know when to rest. And I don't want to make that mistake. And I want to learn from her. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that they would all want that. They would all want us to learn from, you know, maybe things that they, at the end of their lives, would have done differently, you know, when they were younger, or, you know, now in the perspective of the afterlife, that they're like, don't do what I did, you know? So I think it was really refreshing to me, and really important for me to see them. And honestly, I think that it only created more respect on my part for them, because it's very hard for me to take seriously someone who seems too perfect. It's kind of like either you're boring as hell or you're hiding something. like you can't be that perfect, you know. I mean, there's definitely, don't get me wrong, like holiness was real, like sainthood, they deserve their title. But I think the important distinction is it doesn't mean that they're perfect, you know, that they are just as much a, you know, flesh and blood human as we are. So that was,
Yeah. I mean, my own experience with that is that, you know, as people in history, particularly saints, become real to me, it feels even more acute, the call to holiness in my own life, that if they can be saints, then I might be able to be one too. Right. So
yeah.
In our particularities. Yeah. Um, I also learned something new in your presentation that I didn't from the book. I was imagining, I don't know why, I guess I was imagining that your journey with the mystics started with Teresa of Avila. So it's interesting to hear that it started with Julian. But as I heard you describe that, it made sense to me because both of those women stood out to me in a particular way as I was reading your text, because some of the things that you described them talking about are things that, and you sort of noted this in your own presentation, they sound like very new ideas, you know? So if it's feminine language for God with Julian of Norwich or with Teresa of Avila, this idea that God is within and that we can trust ourselves, and that we can embrace sensuality as integral to our spiritual lives. All of those things, also with Julian, the idea of universal salvation, all of these things in a certain kind of telling might sound, you know, new agey or mushy or progressive in ways that make it seem like they're completely new, right? But in a really beautiful and compelling part of your book is to pull the reader into a tradition and say these ideas have been going around in Christian women's circles for centuries. And there's a legacy here. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that. Like, why do these old ideas sound so fresh to us still?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think that, well, for one thing, I think that the teaching of women over time has not been amplified the way the teachings of men have been. And but there's certainly men who have taught many of these things in the Christian Catholic tradition. But you know, I think that's a complicated question because it's a huge institution, and so there's a lot of reasons. But I think, you know, for me, I think it really boils down to kind of simple, like very basic human Homo sapien brain programming where we really want safety, you know, as just like a primal need that we seek out. And so a lot of times more definitive dogma, more things that are like black and white, right and wrong, like those things can really appeal to us. And I think that in an institution that is, you know, all of the decision makers are male historically, I think a lot of times it has leaned towards, well, what most benefits men. And that's not saying that like they've all been evil men or anything, but there has been the lack of women's voices in those decision-making spaces, I think, kind of colors things like using mother for God, you know, like why hasn't that? I mean, there are references in the Bible to that. So why has that become so taboo? You know, I think just the omission of women from a lot of these spaces kind of has made that a much harder road than it really needed to be. But to me, like for like modern men and women, that still kind of boils down to this like just this very primal like safety, just safety. Tell me exactly, tell me certainty, tell me exactly what I have to do to be saved, like the guy in the gospels. And it's a very human thing. But I think what I learned from studying the mystics is like faith becomes so much more buoyant and mysterious in the way that is truly captivating and fascinating when we kind of train ourselves to let go of that frantic clinging to security and safety and kind of open up to the unknown more, because frankly the divine is unknown, and we're all like getting little pieces along the way, but kind of engaging with people who were brave enough to enter into that unknown really kind of helped me relax into, oh, this is available to me too. And I think that's been a really beautiful thing for me.
I really think that's right, that, the more images that we have for God that are available to us, sometimes the scarier that can feel because we're not sure exactly then what is God. Yeah. But that's one of the invitations of the mystical life, is that God is beyond our language to describe who God is. So yes. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more, and because this has really become so central to some of your work, is to really explore some of this feminine language for God. I know that in addition to writing, and this, you mentioned this in your bio, that you lead retreats for people to really dive deep into feminine language for God. I wonder if you could say two things. One is just tell us a little bit more about what that's all about. What did Julian of Norwich talk about? But I also wonder if you might share some of your experiences doing these retreats and walking with people, and what that's like, what you've learned in that space by walking with people who are immersing themselves in this kind of encounter with God.
Right. Oh God, that's been such an honor. Yeah, as far as well, I will say as well, Hildegard of Bingen was the other one in my research that referred to the feminine of God, and specifically the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is a feminine word. And so I will say, it's Julian of Norwich wasn't a one-off, and there's plenty of other theologians who, Elizabeth Johnson, and, wonderful books about it as well. But with Julian of Norwich, she's writing this in the 1500s, and she's, getting these visions from God that she calls showings, and just over and over again, she refers to, specifically for her, Jesus as mother. And it's really interesting in the to bring this into the conversation in our day and age, where we're, there's all of this, everybody, there's so much discourse about gender and pronouns and stuff, and Julian of Norwich is just mixing them up everywhere. I mean, it's just it's she sees past the human binaries into, like you said, like the many metaphors that we're using for God. And so she talks a lot about Jesus being the mother, Jesus birthing us. In medieval art, there's a lot of the side wound of Jesus looking like a birth canal, looking like a vagina. And she kind of makes similar comparisons to that as well, of being birthed like from the wound in his side. And but just it's I was gonna say it's almost exhausting. It's not, it's lovely, but just repeatedly, I can't emphasize enough like how many times she says it, of the mothering of God, the mothering of Jesus. And that was just I wanted to scream and like shake it around and be like, why is no one preaching? Why are there no homilies on this? I mean, especially, we do see maternal metaphors for God in scriptures, and, it's just not something that we get access to very much. So, remind me what the second part of your question was.
Yeah,
the
sorry
retreat.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The retreats have been so special because I sort of it took me a while to find my way of oh, am I not just, but exclusively a writer for women? But some men read my stuff and I really appreciate it because I feel like they're being really intentional about choosing to get women's voices in. But I do I write a lot about women's issues. And so finally I was like, why don't I just gear my retreat towards women? And so I've been doing motherhood retreats and divine feminine retreats. And it's interesting because the motherhood ones kind of become divine feminine because you really can't talk about the experience of being a mother without the obvious parallel to God as a mother and all of these insights that you're getting. And so that it's been so fun and so fascinating because I see how that the permission to image God in a way that a woman can relate to and you can see ourselves in really empowers her in so many ways. And it has only convinced me more and more that this is a necessary good for the church because I mean, they're women kind of having aha moments of, patterns that they have gotten into in their family life that are inequitable. And they really want something different, but not having the awareness or the language beforehand, but kind of being immersed in this kind of gives them that idea. And so they can have that conversation with their spouse. Similar, I've had really difficult conversations with women on the divine feminine retreat where they are realizing that they have been in abusive relationships or they are in situations or have been that have been really harmful in one way or the other, and kind of just the honor of witnessing as I'm not a counselor or anything, but just bearing witness to their own journey of kind of realizing that they deserve more than that, that they want more, and they believe that they could have more for the first time, those things have been really powerful. And even, for those of us who don't have, something huge like that in our lives, I think there is an intimacy with God, with the Spirit that comes from connecting in a way that you can feel yourself represented in, and not necessarily, an old man with a beard up in the clouds, but this idea of, I think that the Hebrew word, ruach for spirit, for the Holy Spirit, is really, the fact that that's feminine, that feels so precious to me because that part of God being the thing that I'm comforted by when I'm feeling heavy, it is very, just in little ways over time, it's kind of become something that I think the women who have embraced it have really found a lot of value in. And I really appreciate when people are able to balance it with other metaphors for God that speak to them as well, but it's fun to just see people kind of experiment and find what's meaningful to them.
Mm. That sounds really powerful. I mean, those moments where people are realizing truths about their lives are holy moments for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious, there was a passage in your book where and since you mentioned you don't have it, I won't ask you to read it, but here is the book. but there was a passage in the book where you're talking, and I think this was in the Julian of Norwich section, where you talk about that you have once, at least once, you've heard in mass a priest maybe preach, maybe in a little bit of an awkward but you appreciated way of talking about, breastfeeding, an analogy between breastfeeding and the Eucharist. But you make the point very clearly that that's nothing like the experience of actually witnessing, having that experience yourself, or witnessing and being close to a mother who is going through that experience with all of its pain, simultaneous pain and beauty and kenotic self pouring out into the other. It reveals some things that are hard to articulate in other spaces.
I agree. That actually has been the passage that people comment on the most to me. That I think that and to be honest, there's as a writer, there's only like most of writing is like work, right? You're just like getting it down, you're getting those thoughts down, you're re-editing it. But every once in a while, the words just flow in a way that feel like it comes from something else. To me, I've heard writers of all persuasions describe this. To me, that feels like the Spirit of God. And that was one of those, that passage was one of those that felt like, wow, like that just like came from something either like really deeper here or like behind me, or, I don't know. But yeah, I think that, male priests can do their very best to communicate something about the Eucharist. But at the end of the day, like when you actually, are witnessing a woman, saying, this is my body broken for you. And it's like, it is pain. And it is, it's embodied, it's enfleshed in front of you. It really takes on so much more power.
I'm curious about your own experiences. I know that you are a parent yourself, and so a lot of what you write about in this book, but I know it seems like even more so in other places, you've written about your own experiences of parenting. In what ways, how does that interact for you, that these kind of dual parts of your life, as a writer and as a parent, somebody who's trying to pour out herself in these different, maybe sometimes competing directions, maybe sometimes generative and fruitfully.
It ebbs and flows, I haven't written anything in months. Like I'm full on family mode right now, which is great. But there have been different points of my life where I've been really frustrated that I don't have as much time to write, and I just have all of these ideas and just no time to get them down. And I've had a friend, a fellow writer friend, tell me, that is, you have to live a life to have something to write about. And if you're just gonna close yourself off from the world, from your relationships, your writing's not going to be very good because you don't have anything to draw from. You have to have that real. So I think about that a lot of I am, doing this hour-long bedtime when I wish it could be 10 minutes. And then I could, what I mean? And I'm doing what is needed and trusting that things are percolating during that time, and that it's changing the way that I think, the way that I see the world, that hopefully will become something of value to put on the paper. But yeah, it's not easy. And on a really practical level, I've really come to rely on concentrated times. So I go to Franciscan Spirituality Center, that's an hour and a half from here. And I'd have 3 days and I just write in their little hermitage, or I have some writer friends we meet at a cabin, we write all day and don't talk to each other, and then we stay up all night with wine and conversation. So it's like I've kind of learned to really lean into those kinds of times. But there was a time when I was younger and had more energy that I could stay up late at night and write, but I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. I saw in U.S. Catholic, Heidi Schlump did a profile of you.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And the tagline of the piece was that you're representing a new generation of Catholic mom bloggers. And I was curious, and I wanted to ask you about how you feel about that label, mom bloggers. I get the impression that you guys are colleagues and friends, so I'm not asking you to
no, yeah,
say something about that, but I'm just curious how you feel about that genre of writing and reflecting on women's experiences.
Right. Yeah. Heidi asked me if it was okay that she used that term because she knew that it was a little bit loaded. But I was like, yeah, it's fine because I liked what she was doing with it. It was kind of pointing out like, oh, this is real, thought-provoking, meaty content. It's not like what you think of when you think of mommy bloggers and like, what I wore to mass on Sunday or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think I have wrestled a lot with the idea of being a mommy writer, whether that's mommy blogger or like the one who writes all the books on motherhood or, because it was like Rewilding Motherhood and then Feminist Prayers. And then I worked really hard to make the Mystics book not feel like it was just for moms because I really wanted like college girls to read it. And, I wanted my grandma to like it. You know what I mean? Like I wanted it to be for everyone. But like there is something in me that for a long time sort of resisted just jumping in and doing that because, and even like in Rewilding Motherhood, I wrote like, I didn't think I would ever write a motherhood book like that. I did not think that I was going to do that. But finally, I kind of realized it was really just sort of internalized misogyny of sort of just assuming that it wasn't serious if it was about women's issues or it wasn't worthy of, serious inquiry or wasn't real work or I don't know. It's such crap. But like that happens so much in female realms of kind of like, oh, that's cute, pat you on the head. But I just sort of decided along the way that women should be taken seriously and our experiences should be taken seriously. So, yeah.
Yeah. To pivot a little bit, I'm curious, maybe this is not so much a pivot. Of the 6 women that you write about, one of them is a mother, Marjorie Kemp. And interestingly, you write about her and she had children and she was married and she gave birth to biological children. And you write about her as someone who became a virgin later in her life. And so I was curious if you might say a little bit about what do you mean by that and what that involves and why that's something that you wanted to talk about.
Yes. I that's one of the most like, I don't know if it's like shocking, but like jarring parts of the book for people, because the title of the chapter is like Becoming a Virgin Again or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll look it up.
Okay. But before this, kind of in
even more how to become a virgin again.
Instruction manual. How to become a virgin again. I was kind of around the time I was looking at these mystics, I was at the very beginning, I was reading a lot of mythology and like folklore and fairy tales and kind of just really interested in female archetypes and how the various forms that women are presented in literature, in storytelling, in like the traditions of different cultures. And one archetype that I kept coming across was the virgin. And that is basically belonging to oneself. And that makes sense, like, because you're like, oh yeah, I think, the maiden is also another way to say it, but I like virgin because it's more shocking. And it's also like a mental image of like being fully intact, fully belonging to yourself, and not at all to get like technical sexual about it. But like, I think it can be helpful sometimes to be shocked because it makes you like stop and rethink. So like maiden doesn't have the same to me. But yeah, so like this idea of like the quest of a virgin's journey is to retain or return to a sense of self-belonging. And in the very like literal sense of not belonging to a man, of being wholly herself, belonging wholly to herself. And so I thought that was really interesting. I spent a lot of time thinking of the Virgin Mary as this archetype, because I thought that's really powerful, because I think there's a lot of discourse when we can get a little tripped up of like, oh, why do we like have to like insist on her perpetual virginity, or why do we have every Christmas, why are we calling her the Virgin Mary, why don't we just call her Mary, or like these things like that. And it became really interesting to me to think about her in a way that was full self-belonging, so that she could say yes to God in a way that was influenced by no one, but a decision that came from her true self, from the depths of herself. So I learned all of this couple years before. And then I start reading the book of Marjorie Kemp, and she, like you said, she's married, she has 14 kids or something. And for a long time wants a vow of chastity. And this is an issue between her and her husband. And finally, she demands it. And she goes on a pilgrimage, which at this time takes several years because, travel is very slow. So she leaves the kids with her husband and her mother, and we're assuming probably a staff of helpers. But she goes off and she insists on wearing all white. And she gets a lot of taunting for this, because she's very clearly not a virgin, and this is very against social code. She should not be doing this. She should not be wearing that. And she's even she's interrogated by bishops several times because, she's a heretic and she's like teaching men or whatever. And they're like, why are you wearing white? Are you not a married woman? And she's like, yes, I am. But I was like, oh my gosh, she knew, she intuited, she knew this virgin archetype, this idea of putting a stake in the ground and saying I belong to myself. I'm going to do what I feel like my God is calling me to do. I'm going to go on this pilgrimage. I'm going to preach on the streets. I'm going to fulfill my life's work. And so that was really beautiful. It made me fall in love with her. But yeah, she's the only mom in the book. So she became the one that I talked to the most.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious how writing this book influenced your own prayer life, or your own, I'm curious if there are any kind of practices that you developed that were new in your family life, or individual prayer practices, or, conversation partners, if these are people that you regularly talk to in your own spiritual life now moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I live beside woods. And so I take Hildegard on walks with me sometimes and think about her teaching of Veritas. And so that's kind of become a spiritual practice. Sorry, my throat's starting to go out. honestly, Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, like that being early on, something that one of the first ones that I read that really, really moved me. And the idea that just journeying deeper into God is also journeying deeper into the self, and not being afraid to name that, and to embrace that. And I mean, honestly, like that really overlapped with a lot of the years of therapy that I've done. And so that was really interesting to kind of see those not as separate things, but like as one and the same. And so that really, so much of my prayer, which for me always involves movement because I have ADHD. So I'm always like walking, kind of walking meditation. I'm not like sit in a chair and pray. So walking is a big practice of mine. But like that being able to understand or to bring in conversation with God to processing something that came up in therapy, and kind of bringing those things together, and that I'm a pretty practical person. So that practical element of spirituality really felt meaningful to me. And then in the very last chapter of the book, I mentioned I got really sick before writing that chapter and had sepsis and was in ICU. And Catherine of Siena was the one that I was thinking about a lot during that time. And so probably for about 6 months after that, as I was recovering and trying to get back to normal life and normal eating and physical strength, she was one that I became a conversation partner. As you said, I like that term a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that chapter was very striking. Because in that chapter you talk about that she really helped you to confront horror and death, and to look at those with a kind of unflinching gaze. And the way that you ended the book, it made me really curious about how that has developed since you finished writing. I mean, if that's a journey that you have continued to be on.
Yeah, I mean, the further and further out I go from that incident, it's something that I think about less and less. But it definitely, the writing of that chapter is really what I needed to process that experience. And so I'm so grateful that was it's just crazy, like it's crazy that like I had one chapter left and I wanted to write it about death and like, but what am I going to say? And here you go. Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, I mean, it's just, writing for me has always been a way that I process, my thoughts and fears and questions and all of it. And so, yeah, I feel really grateful that was, on my to-do list, because then I had to actually do it. But yeah, I would say that this sort of acceptance of the unknown as something safe really has carried through my life in a lot more ways than I expected. Even just saying that, I'm thinking of like, what we talked about earlier, of like not having as many answers as I thought I had theologically when I was 23, and kind of now this was like yet one more way that God was like asking me to believe that things can be good, that whatever is out there, whatever the unknown is, that ultimately, it's a very Hildegard thing to say too, but the wholeness of it all, the wholeness of everything that is God, which is everything, like we can trust that that's good. So yeah, I think in a lot of subtle ways, it really changed my brain chemistry.
That's a really beautiful way of I think summarizing what the mystical path is about,
Yeah.
in the Christian tradition is that the idea, that there isn't uh, that having the answers and having clear language for God is not the same as having experiencing union with God.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
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 One question from an audience member is they wanted to know when you're talking or writing about things that feel unfamiliar to contemporary Catholics today, like maternal imagery for God. We didn't even talk about um, Julian of Norwich's ideas that all will be
Yeah.
saved, right, or all will
Yeah.
be redeemed. They asked, like what kind of resistance have you encountered personally or from readers, and how have you dealt with that?
Mhm. Honestly, at this point in my writing life, I think people generally aren't like I've already scared off everybody who's going to be like unwilling to consider things that are um uncomfortable for them. I mean, I see Goodreads reviews where people are like, "This is heretical," or whatever, But but a lot, like I would say, as I in the years leading up to writing this, I would sometimes do Instagram posts of similar things that came up in the book, and I can remember those times it being really hard for people. I mean, at that point, being called a heretic was really scary and hurtful to me, and now I can sort of just like laugh. But um, yeah, I mean, I think that's why I found it really helpful to have read these women, because being able to cite your source really matters, and people they don't have to believe that any more than you have to believe, whoever they're citing. But it's harder to discount you when it's someone respected in the Catholic tradition or in the Christian tradition. So I found that really helpful. But at the end of the day, it goes back to chapter 1, Teresa of Avila, of like trusting yourself and um, kind of having to learn to be okay with people being upset with you, and also for me learning to pick my battles. Like I don't have to engage in an argument with everybody or try to win everybody over. I don't even have to bring up a controversial topic, or say, like I get to choose when I want to enter into those things. And so that's been a helpful thing for me too, to realize like I don't have to attend every party I'm invited to, like metaphorically, like I can sit this one out or whatever. So,
Yeah. One, maybe just to bring this a little bit full circle, I think one of the chapters that was really, it really hit on this in a particular way is when you talk about Teresa of Lisieux. You talk about some of these issues quite directly, and talk about her as another model. In addition to Teresa of Avila, of course, faced this herself in her own life, where people thought that she was deceived by the devil when she was writing and preaching and teaching. But yeah, you write very beautifully about how Teresa of Lisieux really was someone who modeled to you that maybe making everyone happy is not the point of this of the spiritual life, and that if you are speaking truthfully, then the chips will fall where they lay.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's just I think what they would say, like exposure therapy. Like you just get used to it, and it becomes less scary or less anxiety inducing over time. But also I think finding people who are interested in asking the same questions as you, and so feeling like you're not alone, because like Potter, like you're less of a threat if it's just you, if you're all alone. But but yeah, just getting people together, even if that's virtually, if that, online communities can be really helpful for that. But yeah, also the mystics, it's nice to know that you're not alone.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for a really generative and just inspiring conversation. Thank you. Where can folks learn more about your work and keep in touch with the kinds of things that you're doing moving forward? Do you have any suggestions about that?
My Substack is probably the one I update the most. I have a website too, but sometimes I forget. But retreats can always be found there usually. But my Substack is called The Rewilded Life. So, or you could just look up Shannon Evans Substack. But.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who attended tonight. Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too, Julia. Thank you.
Bye.